Well, good morning, everyone. I apologize for the tech issues. We'll get this sorted out shortly. Um, Today is September 29th, 2024, session of Personal Theology. This program has been sponsored by the UU Church of Berkeley for 45 years, so we're very glad that you're here. Our land acknowledgement. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Huchiyun in the unceded territory of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. May we have the humility and courage to do our part to restore what has been broken and the wisdom to live into a new solidarity with Indigenous communities and the earth. Our speaker today is Wynne Williams. Because we're starting a little bit late, I'm going to shorten the bio because what we want to really hear is Wynne, not me. But he has a PhD in physics and he's at UC Berkeley. He's also a wonderful musician, has a beautiful voice, and he's been studying Michael Meade for many years. And I'm just going to turn it over to Wynne so that we can get started. Thank you.
I've already been introduced. We can skip over this slide. So in this talk, I'm comparing initiation and the rite of initiation to the pandemic. And so I want to start by talking about initiation. So initiation is an archetype. It's a concept that kind of lives in all of us. From our lineage, from our heritage. But it's an archetype that archetypes kind of come and go over history. And it's an archetype that has kind of disappeared in our society, but that may need to be coming back because this is a time where our own initiation is paralleled with the initiation going on in our culture. I'll talk about the initiation first, and then I'll talk about the relationship with the culture. So I've got this picture here, the only picture that I've put in here, that shows the life cycle of a caterpillar. And the butterfly is often used as a symbol of transformation because from a certain perspective, it's like, wait, how can this crawly thing turn into this flyy thing? And so there's clearly this transformation that goes on. And there's this way that that's biologically driven. I don't know for sure, but I think that if the caterpillar, like even a single caterpillar, were off on its own, if it ate enough of the plants it needs and it gets enough nourishment, it would go into its cocoon and it would form a butterfly. It doesn't need a society around it in order to transform into the butterfly. But we do. And Plotkin, in his books, I haven't read this latest one, talks about this transformation. And so the text there on the left, I've highlighted in red there, the things that I think are essential about this is that for us, even as children, we're not autonomous, right? A lot of creatures are actually fairly autonomous once they're born and, maybe a couple of weeks, then they're pretty much autonomous. They can run off on their own. But that's not true with humans. We actually really rely on a lot of nurturance as we're growing up. But there is something special that happens also in adolescence, where that nurturance can't be supplied, in most cases, typically by the parents. So the parents' job is to, raise us, keep us safe, nourish us so that we kind of grow up. But there is a part of our transformation, unlike the butterfly, unlike a mouse, that really requires community. I don't know, maybe we'll discover the mouse requires community too. We know that elephants require community, right? That if there's an area where the elephants have died off and they want to reintroduce elephants to that area, introducing juvenile elephants to that area is not sufficient. As many of you who've studied this know, you have to introduce adult elephants too, because there's actually a cultural transmission among elephants. And they found that like adolescent elephants that didn't have, adult bull elephants around, would be harassing rhinoceros and stuff like that, which normally elephants wouldn't do. And so there in humans also, there's really important cultural transmission. And one of those pieces of transmission is initiation. So it used to be in all cultures around the world that humans would get to a certain stage, certain adolescent stage, raised by their parents and by the tribe and whoever else too. But I think some study found that in like a lot of indigenous communities, a typical baby would be suckled by on an average of three mothers. Their biological mother and a couple other women who would be like, "Oh, this baby needs feeding," and would just take care of their needs. But when adolescence comes, there's a transformation that needs to happen from a kind of childhood perspective and kind of being in the lap of the mother to a shift to being held by a greater mother, Mother Nature. And that shift is needed in us individually, each of us. Sometimes it happens later in life in our culture, and that's, I think, often what's happening in a so-called midlife crisis. And that process of awakening to a deeper sense of ourselves can happen multiple times in life. So there can be some awakening that happens at adolescence and some that can happen later. It's needed in our culture too, right? I mean, it's kind of obvious to us in this room that our culture is in this kind of adolescent phase, right? Where there's like this kind of intense curiosity about needs and can we meet our needs and can we go out there and find what we want and all that kind of thing. And there needs to be an awakening, as would happen with individuals. There needs to be a cultural awakening also to a greater sense when we're more awakened to our wholeness of ourselves. That wholeness actually shines a light into our culture of, it's like that Howard Thurman quote, "Don't ask what the world needs of you, ask what lights you up, and go do that, because what the world needs is more people who are lit up." I'm paraphrasing there. He used a slightly different words. But we need that cultural shift. And so when we talk about our cultural problems and we talk about the problem of greed and how we can meet everyone's needs, but not everyone's greeds and stuff like that, again, it's really actually intricately tied to this rite of initiation into adulthood. And if we could make that shift as a culture into that adult awareness, it would serve both the individual and the collective needs. Because when I know for myself, when I am doing the things in the world, like sometimes my work at UC Berkeley, that are my calling, it's lighting me up, but it's also of service to the people I'm interacting with. And that's where we need to get to, is where it's not about, can I get mine? It's about, can I give what is seeded and sown into me, like from before birth, perhaps, right? What's in me that is a gift into the world? Can I find a way to give that? And when everyone is giving all of those gifts that actually light us up to do so, then we don't need all that other junk, right? Because we're filled from within. And there's something in some relationship class I studied that we can never actually fill ourselves from others. It's not actually possible. There was a way that we could be filled fully when we were in utero, maybe, right? And maybe when we were a little infant, we could be filled fully from our mother. But beyond that, it's really not possible. The only way to be filled is to fill from within. And so we need to make that cultural shift. Otherwise, we're always trying to get more outside ourselves, and there isn't enough of that, because there never would be, right? Because what we really need is that inner infusion of our own aliveness. And no amount of anything else can satisfy that, right? No amount of what you don't need can satisfy it. And that's where I think the crux of the greed comes from, is it's actually people who don't know how to satisfy their need from within. So that's a lot to say how vital I think that initiation is. So, how does the pandemic compare? So, initiation has three steps: separation, ordeal, and the return to community. So again, in a traditional culture, Aunt Emmy and Uncle Bob would show up with masks on, and they would take the kid during the night and take them off into the woods, right? And the kids had been prepared, right? I mean, these would be people who had studied all their lives how to survive in the woods, right? Um, so for us, the pandemic was different because we hadn't studied all our lives how to live on our own outside of community. But nonetheless, there's this kind of sudden separation, which is exactly what we experienced in 2020 in March, right? And maybe we had a little preview in that there was already a certain amount of work from home and stuff like that going on. I know that I had already my work from home kind of portfolio of, web links and stuff like that set up so that I could work from home. Okay. So that's a very direct parallel. There's also a direct parallel with step two, the ordeal. So in a traditional culture, the ordeal for everyone would be different. And sometimes in some cultures, it was different for the girls and the boys. And many of these cultures also had an understanding of multiple genders. It wasn't just two. But there would be a way of understanding how to, and there would be elders, of course, who had been through this before, right? Who would set up the initiation process, who would take the young people out away from their parents or out away from their usual supports of friends and everything like that, so that they could have a different experience. And everybody's ordeal would be different. Someone might encounter a snake. Someone else might encounter, a beautiful vista that awakens them to something. People would have all different kinds of experiences. Someone might find themselves exhausted. Someone else might find themselves sleeping a lot. They would be out in nature. That's another key thing, too, that's a parallel. You notice how much we were in nature during the pandemic, right? The parks suddenly had people hanging out in them. People's condo complexes had people, sitting in the common areas of the condo complexes that hadn't been populated except for squirrels. And suddenly everyone was out there with their laptops, right? And so there was a way that there was this return to nature, which would be part of a traditional initiation also. And people would have all kinds of different experiences in that ordeal. My experience was not about disease. It was not about losing my job or anything like that, like a lot of people experienced. I did experience some isolation and loneliness. It was about Cindy's Parkinson's really ramping up, and my trying to figure out how do I step up and deal with this, and then my finding that I wasn't enough to deal with it, but I also wasn't enough to call in people to help, and like how do I manage this? So and someone else's ordeal is very different, and I want to take a little time to hear what some of all of your ordeals have been too. I want to take time for that and not have the whole time be me talking. But the point is that everyone's ordeal is different. Separation is the same, but then everyone's ordeal is unique. And that would be true in a traditional culture also. Now, I think where we fail in our culture is the return to community. So even before the pandemic, there were lots of occasions where people would have separation and ordeal, right? Somebody has a debilitating injury, they get separated and they're going through an ordeal. Oh, yeah. If someone has a divorce, if someone, has a death in the family, loses a spouse, loses a child, all of these create a separation and an ordeal. Someone loses a job, that's been happening a lot, right? But this part about return, people have sometimes homelessness or drug addictions they're experiencing. These are all separations with ordeals involved, and they're unique ordeals. But how do you return? How do you bring people back into community? So, and in particular, how do you have enough awakened elders to do that? right? So in a traditional culture, you would have people who've been through this process before. They went through their own initiation, and you have maybe generations of them, right? And then there's just a few people this year who are going through that initiation, and you have this larger tribe holding this. So when people return, they would be debriefed by the elders. Some of us have been to, things where you went out and, made like a circle of prayer ties and sat in the circle for 24 hours. And then at the end, the person who was leading it, if you didn't come back on your own, went and found you, and said, it's time to come back. And maybe there were tears and hugs and a lot of support. And I don't know if a lot of us, maybe we could just do a show of hands. How many people, when we sort of came back from the pandemic and came back to work, really felt held like that? Not a whole lot. How many people felt held, when they came back, say, to work or came back to, now maybe when we came back to church, we felt that, right? Yeah, right. So, I hadn't joined this church yet, but there were communities that I came back to where people were like, oh, we're back, and maybe we had masks on, but we get hugged and stuff like that. So there's a way that this return is kind of a missing step. So I don't know that I need to go through these next couple slides in detail. I've kind of really talked about this a lot, that in the separation step, there's a lot of parallels, even this parallel about masks, right? That here we were wearing masks in this pandemic, and masks would have been part of the traditional way that young people would be separated, right? Is that somebody would, aunt and uncle would show up with masks on. And then the parallel of being put in nature and stuff. And then the ordeal, a lot of parallels, again, like I've already mentioned, I don't need to spend a lot of time on this slide, that, there's nature as a support. A lot of us were supported with neighbors or supported our neighbors. I bought groceries for some folks for a year, stuff like that. And then, engaging different skills and encountering the unexpected. So this would have been why everyone's ordeal is unique, is that you're encountering the unexpected. And we certainly did. So this third step is important. And like I said, people returning traditionally from some kind of initiation rite like that would really mine their experiences for insights. And maybe in this community, we've done some of that. I know I certainly have. Like, what was that was going on for me? And is there something that I can learn about that helps me awaken to a fuller sense of myself? Because that would be the point of initiation. As I say in the second row here, that people who would return from an initiation in a traditional culture are now considered adults. Before that, if they have not, no matter what their age is, if they have not gone through that initiation, they would not be considered adults. They would not be able to serve as chief or something like that, right? But so somebody has to be initiated and awakened to the deeper sense of their self and soul before you would entrust them with those powers, right? And for a while, when we came back to work, we were entrusted, for example, at least I was, with setting our own work schedules and stuff like that. And some people are still doing that. I was asked recently to go back to, 8 to 5. And I was like, all right, you want to have good relationships with people. So I said, okay. But like, there is a way that like, aren't we adults now? And so there's this attempt to return to the old ways, right? And then in the third row, I've pointed out that, as I talked about before, that what lights us up helps us light up everyone, right? And so I feel like post-pandemic, we've brought that light to a few people. So some of what I had to do during my ordeal was find ways to bring in caregivers for Cindy, because it was more than I could do. And then some of those caregivers are still providing support and love and feeling my support and love. So there's this way that there's been this lovely mutuality, but it's been among small groups. For me, I haven't. I kind of spectacularly failed a month ago. Sometimes when you fail, you're actually closer to success, so maybe that's not a bad thing. But I kind of spectacularly failed a month ago to bring a big piece to protect the university from about $1 billion worth of time lost. And it wasn't really received. In fact, I was kind of criticized for having spent time on that. So, yeah, so there's a way that this part is missing about how do we really bring back the gifts to contribute to everyone's benefit. There were other things too with that piece that I was trying to bring back. If I really look at it, it wasn't really my core light and calling and purpose, right? It was something I was doing because I wasn't being seen for my core light and calling and purpose. So I thought, well, maybe I can deliver something else to this community that's more what they want, right? So, okay, so I can own responsibility for that. And I don't remember if I had any third slide. Well, I have this. This is kind of the final slide. Is maybe we could hear from some people in the group about what. These are just some brainstorming ideas I came up with. We could brainstorm as a group. We can. I don't know if we'll do that, but we'll maybe hear from a few people. What was your pandemic experience, and did you have insights from that? And that. This second one is an important point. That so the pandemic clearly has parallels to a rite of initiation, but why does that matter? And it matters because that archetype lives in us about the archetype of initiation. And so when circumstances like the pandemic are experienced by our self and soul that are a parallel with a rite of passage like that, then our soul says, here it is. This is our chance. Here we go. Okay, this is the initiation. I've been waiting for this, right? And so that part of ourselves that wants to go into the cocoon and transform awakens. And there's a beautiful song about this that I don't know well enough to sing. I talked about that greed is an unmet proxy need, as talked about in the NVC about communication or compassionate communication framework. That what we really need is to awaken and share our true gifts, right? And then when we try to do something else instead, it can come off as greedy. I mean, even my trying to share that thing at the university a month ago kind of came off as greedy. Like, well, what is Wynn thinking that he should be the, muckety muck delivering this to us, Whereas if I was really coming from my authenticity, maybe it wouldn't come off that way. In that case, it just comes off like, well, I don't know what Wynn's doing. Well, I don't pay attention to that. But anyway, there's also some lovely stories that I don't think I have to tell, time to tell. But like what we were talking about yesterday in this room, can we reimagine community, right? And how do we return not to the community the way it was, but to a reimagined community? So now I'd like to open it up for, we probably won't have time to hear from everyone, but I'd like to hear from people who would like to say something about your pandemic experience, whether you have an insight out of that or not. Karen.
I'm one of those, I'm Karen. I'm one of those that really spent a lot of time in nature during the pandemic. And then I also got a dog. We call it a pandemic puppy. I got a dog during that time. And I really just fell in love with walking and being outside. And I don't think that would have happened without the pandemic. And the other thing is literally I have a cat and a dog. And my animals became, my neighbors would come over and we'd all sit, on the ground or on the grass out front of my place, social distancing, and everybody would pet my cat and pet my dog, and they would call it fur therapy. and you know, it started a bond, and we still do that. I'm still very close with my neighbors because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So when
Yes.
we're going to have to do this in a special way, either
Yes.
the person who's in the room that's speaking could just come up a little closer to your microphone to help us, and then we'll share back and forth. Now somebody on Zoom would give their maybe a pandemic reflection, like we just kind of heard from I think it was Karen.
Yeah. Yeah. So just to summarize what Karen said, for those who didn't hear, is there was a lovely bonding of neighbors and pets and fur therapy during the pandemic, and that has continued. So that's been a learning and a new opening from the pandemic. So let's hear from someone on the screen.
All right. Anybody
And then
here
why don't you come up and be ready? Yeah. So after the person shares on the screen.
Well, if nobody's gonna pop forward, I'm gonna mention that, okay, Cordell, you have your hand raised. You want to talk about something during the pandemic?
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Hold on a
No,
second.
Cordell
Hold
first.
on.
Cordell.
We're doing the screen. Cordell. Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
first I want to thank you, Wynn, for this talk, because actually these pieces are in my consciousness, but by how you presented it, it ties a lot of things together. I think a lot of us had the question coming out of the pandemic. The question is, what just happened? We've all had the what just happened moment, but I think many of us have had the experience of, separation of some kind. Literally, for Lonnie and I, separation is literal. And at the same time, though, now we're asking the question, what's our new relationship and our new contribution to our community? So all of these pieces resonate in a powerful way, but I just like the fact that now it's not a felt experience, but a conscious experience that I can reflect on now in a different way. So now I can focus on it and think about it and integrate it better, as opposed to just have it strike my body, but not, again, maximize the integration. So I just wanted to say thank you.
All right, thanks, Cordell. All right, whoever's at,
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
So
Okay.
tell us your name and then.
Okay. I'll make it easy. It's the same name as yours. So another Karen. Two quick stories. One is I'm a musician, amateur musician. And so when the pandemic happened, all of our groups stopped, except some of us decided to play out in the garden. And then we got neighbors that said, "What was that you played? And are you going to play next week?" But they didn't come over. But I knew they were listening. And sometimes they would give feedback, and I really liked that one this week. What was it? That's one thing. And the other thing is, over a long period of time, I've written lots of stories, but I didn't do anything with them. But over the pandemic, I thought, oh, this is a good time to put those stories, put them together and share them. And I learned a lot by sharing them or putting it together, actually, because I had to think about, well, who is this for? And who would want to read this? And that kind of was an initiation for me, that I learned a lot just by looking at these stories and seeing what was it I wrote about and what was the message in it. So those are my two stories.
All right. And
Karen, do we have anyone else on Zoom, Lonnie?
Yeah, we got Carol. Yeah, we got Carol Carlisle.
This isn't a Zoom story, sorry, but they used to have coming of age, and my precious Jessie went out. They took them out in the woods and left them for the day. They went up to Freestone, and my kid is an adventurer, and feels safe doing that. So, I don't know where we are with coming of age. We could do adult coming of age. And my Zoom pandemic story is I do WordPress blogging, and we created a WordPress blog, a group on Zoom of people from around the world that would get together every Tuesday. And, it finally faded away, but I see them and it's like, man, I really actually know that person in England. I know that. And I know this one that's moved from Sacramento it made my world bigger, oddly, by going in, just like the butterfly. So thank you for this win, and Lonnie.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome, Carol. And Cordell, do you have another thing you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a comment. I'd like to hear your response to the idea that so initiation is one frame to put this in, but another one that strikes me is that disruption oftentimes leads to the opportunity for reorganization. So we have default behaviors and patterns that actually become automatic, and they fit one context, but it could be that context changes and we need to fit a different context. So when there's a mismatch, sometimes disruption happens and the existing patterns can't continue. And then somehow within ourselves, we have to find a way to reorganize and create new patterns that better fit the context. And so it's another way to understand that at some point, being a caterpillar doesn't work anymore. You have to go, now what's my new self? And you have to discover what your butterfly is. And I love that metaphor that you presented. So I'm just curious of what your response would be to that frame of, disruption, disorganization, then reorganization / rebirth.
Yeah. So I think that's exactly right, Cordell. If we look around our society, we can see that we have several simultaneous crises, right? We have the obvious climate crisis, which even for people who don't believe that the world is warming, just look at like disappearance of species. Just look at, like really obvious, undeniable things. And we also at the same time, I see the green man is here.
I just had to show you the beautiful nature, and I don't know if they can see you or not.
What? Do you want to come up here and be seen? So come up in front of the camera so you can be seen on the Zoom. Here we are talking about exactly what Cindy Greenleaf is bringing here, which is we're talking about people showing up with masks and taking us to a new reality where we're more connected with nature. So, okay, there we go. So right, not only do we need to heal our culture as a culture, we need to heal our connection with nature. And then there's another one which people are not talking about very much. Even at UC Berkeley, when I put in my goals, as they talk about it, that I wanted to explore more with artificial intelligence, my supervisor said, nah, don't do that. Now, of course I'm going to do it anyway, but like,
of course,
humanity is being handed these tremendous powers: artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotechnology. We haven't heard a lot about biotechnology lately, but it's there. We're in the what some people call the Anthropocene, where now the whole planet is being affected by what we're doing. We're, I think, perhaps about to become a spacefaring civilization. I'd like us to be a loving one that's enlightened and awakened to our deep sense of ourselves, so we're not out there just trashing the rest of the solar system. The amount of resources we have available to us, like already the sunlight striking the earth is 100,000 times all of human energy usage, right? And so if we take energy as a proxy for kind of a limiting step in a lot of our things, for example, recycling would be fixed by chemical recycling. Currently, what we're doing is mechanical recycling, where you try and crush the bottles up and make a new bottle. Only works with 2 kinds of plastic. If you have chemical recycling, you can do everything. And the only thing that limits that is energy. And already on this planet, we have 100,000 times what we need if we could utilize the solar energy. And guess what? In the solar system, all that light that misses the Earth and misses the other planets, we have another 8 orders of magnitude. So we have 13 orders of magnitude available to us. And so people are saying, oh, our budget is so tight. Yeah, for the next 2 decades, but it's just a tight spot we're in. It's not the whole future of humanity. Yes, you come up to the microphone. Okay. I'm sorry, I don't have a way of bringing my.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I really loved your talk, and my name is Kathleen. And the initiation you talked about, and you mentioned one, rites of passage, okay, which in many cultures has to do with circumcision, whether it's Jewish or not, and for men and women in African cultures. But so that's an ordeal, no matter what, and then the forest and all that. It's important. But I was thinking about one of the problems we have in our culture, basically, is we're pretty much become secular. Now, that's not necessarily true in this church because we make a little room for something else. But within, I'm finding out that. But within these cultures that you're referring to as sort of the fundamental cultures, they all have spiritual language. They all have some kind of way to talk about the things you can't see, but that are important to you, which we don't. I mean, it's interesting the way you were talking about your department at Berkeley, and you want to do this new thing, but they don't really know how to receive you. It's like, oh my God, is he trying to take power, or what is he trying to do? But rather than saying you just had this amazing experience and you understood that you really need to work with AI now, and that's your new purpose. And your who was department chief would say, that's fantastic. That sounds really meaningful, and I think we all need that awakening in our department. Now, if you're I was one of those people once. What's the darn name? I'm blanking on it. When your department chief or head,
Department chair.
Chair. That's it, chair. If your department chair had any kind of spiritual understanding of human development, perhaps he, I assume it was a he.
Currently.
Currently. Okay. Could receive you in a different kind of way. So that's what I just wanted to talk about, that I think we're at a deficit of our so-called spiritual, it doesn't have to be deistic, but spiritual understanding of transformation. And maybe the pandemic, the isolation, the contact with nature has given us a sense that we need some new vocabulary, some new awareness of being able to incorporate this transformative process, which, I mean, psychology handles that to some extent. You go to therapy and you start feeling better. Oh, I'm a new person. But we still lack a kind of real essence of understanding transformation.
Yeah. Can I step in here?
Yeah, I'm going to go now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for those comments. That's really reminding me that one of the key things, and then I want to hear from, one of the key things that I learned this through Michael Mead's things, but that Carl Jung talked about, that differentiated him from Freud, is that Freud thought that unconscious material was limited more or less to repressed problems. Whereas Jung said, no, part of our gift, part of our awakening, part of our creative essence is also in that unconscious or repressed material. And so it's not just about healing, but it's about bringing fullness and aliveness to go into there. Yeah, do you want to come up?
And when we have somebody on Zoom, can you just cue them up? And David Lingenfelter, are you ready to go, Dave? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, first, thank you very much. When I enjoyed your presentation, and I've enjoyed getting to know you over the last several months. So it somewhat pains me to have to say that I disagree with your basic premise that we are out of the pandemic. I know even President Biden has said it's over, but I don't believe that. We have still close to 1,000 people a week dying from COVID, many more getting the illness and suffering damage to their bodies as a result of the infections. Not everyone, but many. And I've been publishing extensively on social media about the science of the damage that COVID is doing to our bodies and to our brains. For example, in the last 18 hours, one of my posts has yielded close to 50,000 views and over 1,000 likes. So I have come to be respected as a minor authority in this subject matter. And I wanted to let you know that and let the other folks that are paying attention to this know that there's a different opinion about the basic premise.
Thank you, David. And actually, I agree with you for two reasons. One is that the physical, the biological pandemic is absolutely still underway. Many of us have returned to trying to live our lives in the way we did before, which is why we need to be sharing with each other about our experiences and helping each other interpret the learnings that we've had so far in this pandemic. So that's one reason, is the biological, but there's other things. In my opinion, a lot of the other things that we've seen happen over the last few years since the pandemic supposedly ended, some of the, I mean, who among us thought we would see land wars in Europe again, right? I mean, there's been all kinds of continued disruptions, and it may happen for the remainder of our lives that we will have a series of continued disruptions because our culture has not completed the initiatory transformation. And so the initiation must continue until we transform, I think.
Brilliant.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Is there somebody coming up to the podium?
She's going to defer to me.
Okay, come on up.
Because I have to leave for a choir soon. And what I want, well, let me step carefully over here.
Thanks.
What I wanted to mention is something that I think you're familiar with, right? That the men's fellowships at this church, and also previously when I was with the Oakland church back in the 80s and 90s, one of the things we did was mentoring youth coming of age so that this process of initiation would take place. And it was actually, it was the first time I was at Freestone. We took coming of age youth from the Oakland church up to Freestone for that, and did the whole thing of wandering and all that with them as much as we could on that site. And then again here at this church, where this is now a few years back, because I met Michelle Wallach's son, who's now like a grown man. But as a kid, I was a mentor to him when we did our initiation thing by taking him over to the Tenderloin in San Francisco, just for a day, and during the daytime and all, very safe. But it was the idea that introducing them to quite a different cultural context than what was here. And tonight in the men's fellowship, what we're doing is we're going to be using some of this stuff in a now the men's fellowship, Men and the Water of Life, Michael Meade, who's kind of a Robert Bly descendant, or whatever you want to call it, for those who know about that stuff. As I said, I got this book back in the 90s. So my bookmark here is near the back of the book, because now we're not young people being initiated. We're the men in the men's fellowship are largely old. And so there's a part in here that talks about what are the challenges that men should address in older age, and as a fellowship doing that, not just as individuals in terms of mostly health issues and things like that. But so we're going to address this tonight in the men's fellowship. And so I saluted the idea of Wynn talking about this morning as being important and something that we want to do, would like to see more of happen here and at UUCB. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Be careful.
Walk around that keyboard.
Okay, good idea.
Thank you, Bob. So I want to see if there's anyone else on Zoom who hasn't spoken who would like to say something. I see Cordell's hand up. Is there anyone else over there, or should we just hear?
There's two in the group.
And there's two in the group who want to talk. So let's hear quickly from Cordell if you just have a moment, and then why don't you come up here and be ready?
Yeah.
Both of you.
I'll be brief. Occasionally I can be brief. So while we're talking about transformation, I just wanted to add maybe a grounding metaphor. So all of us have had the experience of an earworm. So an earworm is when you get this tune that kind of loops in your brain and you can't get away from it. And that's that's a feature of the human system, that we can loop things. And so when I think about initiation, I link it to transformation, and it's not a one-time thing. And we have to understand that in life we will form, figuratively speaking, earworms and patterns that we need to break. And so I just want to introduce the idea that we will have periodic, on-demand transformations, because we have to deal with life as it approaches us. And so don't fall into the idea that this is a one-time thing and it's a one transition thing. We have to understand we get locked in loops and patterns. We have to be able to recognize those and then have strategies to release ourselves from those, because they limit our responsiveness, our thinking, our perceptions of reality. So I just wanted to add another metaphor that we get stuck in earworms about, climate denial or about Trump or whatever. And these earworms will lock us up. So I'm done. That's all I wanted to share with that metaphor.
Thank you, Cordell.
Thank you, Cordell, and thank you, Wynn. This is what I've realized thinking about the pandemic is that other people's creativity spurred that in me. I have a neighbor down the block who repairs violins. She knows many violinists. And during the pandemic, once a month, all summer, she would invite violinists and their groups to play for the neighborhood. And so we would all bring our chairs and sit around and just listen to fabulous music. At the same time, my son and his wife knew that their twins, who are now 13, they were then 9 and 10, really needed to be around other children. And they tried to figure out how they could do this. And so they ended up going to the beach every single time they could possibly do it, taking all their other friends with them. And they ended up body surfing and, doing that kind of thing. And that made me, I don't know, it kind of gave an energy to me. And with Judy Sam, and in terms of working with the Social Justice Council here at UUCB, Judy Sam and I put together a program where people throughout the congregation bought diverse books for local schools, for 4 different schools in Richmond. And we ended up with, I think, 300 books that we were able to present to 4 different local schools. And then I began to think, stuff needs to be done around housing. And so I was able to invite a man, Eli Moore, from the Othering and Belonging Institute, to come and speak to the Social Justice Council. And he did a great deal of research, which I'd like to go back to, because we somehow didn't follow through on that. And I would like us to do that. And then that made me think the whole church needs to know more about the Social Justice Council. So almost a year ago, 9 months or 11 months ago, we had the Social Justice Sunday, in which every group, and it was one of the joys of my life. In my work life, I did a lot of organizing, and I hadn't done that. For me, it's a creative thing to do. And to be able to bring those 17 groups together and have a whole Sunday, I found just really exciting. And I would just want to say that it was the people who were earlier showed creativity that kind of spurred that in me. And I think that's something we can all do for other people, is show, it can be done. All right, that's all. Thank you. Yes, I do jump rope here.
I am Dwight, and thank you, Wynn. It's been an interesting discussion. I wanted to pick up on one point that you brought out, that people are seeking fulfillment from community, but that's not sufficient. It does have to come within, and I would argue that community just helps us find what's actually already within us. The Jung archetypes and unconscious consensus is inbred within us, and community helps us examine that, find out what it is, and how to act on it.
Yeah, so let me just close by saying that I've loved everyone's input, and I'd love to have an opportunity for us to all talk about this more. This feels like really enjoyed this topic, and there were several points that when I go back and listen to the recording, I'll have more comments about as I think about this. And I've been really honored to be given this forum to talk with all of you. Thank you.
More. Thank you, Wynn. This was great.
Thank you, Wynn.